think creativity
is a lot like surfing. You dream of catching a wave. You dream of it happening before a wave, you just standing above the ocean, right away.
Bienvenue au Cirque du Soleil.
Bienvenue and welcome to Cirque du Sound, a sonic trip brought to you by Cirque du Soleil. On this show, we redefine the boundaries of creativity with some of today's most forward thinkers, doers, and creators, exploring how the creative spark dances inside all of us. My name is Michel Laprise. I'm the creative guide at Cirque du Soleil and director of a few shows. Welcome to our podcast. Today on the show, we're going to dive into a conversation about musical inspiration and about drawing on our foundational influences. What does it feel like to unpack a masterpiece and create something new and innovative from it? How do you do this in a way that still respects and honors the original work? A key part of the creative process, for sure, and a truly delicate tightrope to walk. Right now in the background, you're hearing the music of one of our most famous and successful shows, Love, a beautiful and unique Cirque du Soleil show that celebrates the musical legacy of the Beatles. It explores the history of the Beatles' music and story through an interpretive acrobatic stage performance and a surround sound sonic experience. The stage show itself is an incredible mixture of choreography, acrobatics, scene changes, character work that take us on a journey through time. But there is even more magic hiding behind the scenes. This unique show, Love, was created through the historic reinterpretation of the Beatles' classic music and the creative use of technology to restore, remix, and enhance it. Son of renowned Beatles producer Sir George Martin, Giles is the visionary music producer and engineer who helped reimagine the Beatles' music for the Love show into what it is today. Giles Martin, welcome to Cirque du Sound.
Wow, thank you. If I set this out, what an introduction! I feel I can just die now. Thank you, Michel. And can I just say what an honor it is to be speaking with such an amazing creative spirit as yourself, who's done the most extraordinary shows with Cirque du Soleil. So, thank you for that.
My God, thanks a lot. It's a teamwork. Can you please introduce yourself? Because I just did it, but I like when people introduce themselves with their own words. And describe for me and our listeners what it is that you do exactly as a music producer and engineer.
Well, so I'm Giles Martin. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm a music producer or engineer. It's a multifaceted journey. There's none more different than actually working with Cirque du Soleil making the Love show. But quite often, we are like music directors. If you imagine a film where you have a bunch of actors and the director has the over and deciding factor on what that creative mission should be and what that creative person be. A record producer or a music producer will do the same thing with artists. So essentially it's that, and then as an engineer mixing or balancing sound, and then you're responsible for the overall finished product, if you like. That's what a music producer should be responsible for. So you have to have a vision, you have to have attention to detail, but most of it is psychology. Most of it is, as Paul McCartney said to me, having worked, I did an album with him, and obviously my father with the Beatles worked with him a lot. He said, the good thing about you Martins is you have a good bedside manner. And what he means is you can lie next to each other in bed and talk about things. It's a nice way of explaining it. So yeah, having a good bedside manner is important.
So you're one of few, if not the only person who's been given the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, of the Beatles catalog. Can you please explain what that actually means for our audience?
Yes, I suppose it means that you're constantly in danger of getting fired. No, actually, what it means is, and there's a trust that goes on with the Beatles the remaining Beatles and the wives and the children, where whenever there's a new project with the Beatles project, I suppose I'm the artist director. So we've recently been remixing the albums or re-releasing the albums. So I will take Revolver, we've just done. We did the White Album, Abbey Road, Let It Be. I did the Get Back project with Peter Jackson. And essentially, I'm based at Abbey Road Studios, and I take the material and they trust me to work on it for them. And it's, you know, it's a huge honor. My father signed the Beatles and made all their albums. I never expected to ever be in this situation in my life, but I'm absolutely honored that I am.
Wow. So for audience to understand, like you work with the stems, you know where the
we work with the original tapes. They recorded onto 1-inch 4-track tape mainly, which is basically an old tape system. It's fun. It also sounds beautiful, by the way. And the funny thing about tapes is you can put them on a machine and they play. Now, the strange thing about computers is you can't fire up a computer from 10 years ago, 15 years ago and make it work. But the great thing about the Beatles' legacy is that I can dip into any of the eras from 1962 to 1970, and I can have their music at my fingertips, and it sounds exactly the same as when they originally recorded it.
What's the feeling to be in contact with the real material, the energy of like such a significant moments in the music history? Like you.
Well, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary because it's easy to forget the human element that goes on. It's easy to see music as a flat surface. And what I mean by that is sound that comes out of your speakers into your headphones, and you forget that there's a person actually making that sound, and you forget that is in real time. There's no.
You know, you take Yesterday, it's Paul McCartney singing and playing the guitar at the same time in the studios.
Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Suddenly, I'm not half the man I.
And that recording, you know, takes as long as the song took. And then they added some strings on it, but it's pure. That is it. There's no that is the performance.
Suddenly, why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say.
And you think about how many times that 3 minutes has been listened to in the world. And it's when you hear that and you go, wait a second, what's this? And there's two things that occurred to me at the time.
One is that you kind of want to know what the magic is so you can recreate it. You want to know what the buttons you press that make the magic happen. And there's a beauty and also a strange disappointment because you realize you can't do it in the fact that these people are just geniuses. They're just really, really good. And they're just making the sound. How do they get the sound? Is that they're humans making the sound is the answer. It's not any technology. It's just someone in a room. And that's so incredibly special. And it's a bit like finding a manuscript by Shakespeare that he wrote these words that people ever know, to be or not to be. He wrote down on a piece of paper. He had that idea. He wrote that on a piece of paper, and now everyone knows that exists. Yeah. And Strawberry Fields Forever, John Lennon's playing the guitar, kissing goodbye to Sean, or to Julian, actually. Kissing goodbye to Julian, and then saying, let me take it down, you know, because we're going to Strawberry Fields. That's a good idea. And it's just like, wow, where does this come from? It comes from spirit, and it comes from a human being, and that's what it doesn't come from technology. It comes from people.
Would you say there's a connection with what they were living and what the society were living, and they were channeling that and crystallizing that in some forms?
Yeah, yes, of course. I think every great artist reflects their time, but every great artist at the same time is also timeless.
Yeah.
So there's a combination, and also future thinking. So yes, I think there's a number of things here. I think the Beatles were at a time in the 60s where there was a huge transitional change in America and around the world. And in the UK, certainly, there was but they also had each other. There was also four of them. The funny thing about the Beatles is that you hear Yesterday or Eleanor Rigby, which is just Paul and strings and guitar, or you'll hear Julia by John Lennon, which is just John Lennon and a guitar. It's still the Beatles. It's still the Beatles.
Yeah,
It's not
you're
John
so
Lennon
right.
or Paul McCartney. It's still the Beatles. And that's because you sense the other three members are always with. There's always four. Talk about collaboration with the Love Show. The collaboration between myself and Dominic, and the inspiration, and my father as well, was really important to have that collaboration, because you inspire each other and you push each other and you argue. I mean, that's the thing, is the important thing is about collaboration, artistic collaboration, is to disagree. You learn more from disagreeing than you do from agreeing. It's not a river that flows smoothly isn't necessarily isn't the fun ride. The turbulence is important as well. Otherwise, it'd be no fun to go river rafting. And that's what the creative approach is like. It's this bouncy, turbulent journey that you go on, and it's exhilarating. It's fun because that's the process. There's almost a fear of confrontation in art now. And the confrontation in art is one of the most important things. And when it comes to the Beatles and what they did, people talk about that confrontation, but that confrontation was born with a foundation of love, and that's why we called the show Love. And people talk about John and Paul. John and Paul had such rivalry. John wanted to write a song like Hey Jude, but couldn't. And Paul probably wanted to write I'm the Walrus, but couldn't. But that's not the point. The point is that they did it, and as soon as anyone had something, they would gather around them and they would make it better. And that's the way that collaborative art should be. It's like you're working with someone and you may go, hey, Michel, I'm not sure about this, but let's just do it. Let's throw ourselves into it. Let's not be scared of this. And also not to go, I told you so at the end of it. That's the point. It's like, and it takes, people spend too much time talking about stuff and not enough time doing things in art. That's the thing. God. You can. I say to people when I'm doing music, I did this film Rocket Man, the Elton John film, and I said to the director Dexter Fletcher, who's a really good friend of mine. I love him. I said, listen, Dex, I'm gonna get it wrong so many times, but let me get it wrong so we can get it right. Let's not be scared of anything. And it was a great creative process. That's the process. Let's throw things at the wall and see what happens. Let's not be scared. No one's gonna die here.
It's related to trust, because you trust yourself and you trust the other person. So this is where you can go in those areas and try. A juggler, if you want to juggle 9 balls and you just juggle 8, you have to accept you're going to drop some of them. Otherwise, you're never going to juggle 9.
Absolutely, and it's to do with trust, but it's also, Michel, to do with taste as well. You have to trust each other's taste.
Yes.
So you have to know that each other's judgment is right. That's the key, because otherwise you end up doing this for the sake of it. So there has to be that thing. It's like, well, Michel, if you say to me, listen, Giles, I mean, I can see what you're doing here, but it doesn't feel right. And then I have to go, with empathy, I have to go, you know what? I think you've got a point here. I think there's an understanding here. And that's the way it has to be. At the same time, it has to be fairly small as well. You can't do things with, you can't workshop 50, you can't have 50 people's opinion. It has to be a small group. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that inspired me by working on the Love Show, which actually was like a breakthrough. Artistically, it was a breakthrough period for me. And I think it was a breakthrough period for a number of reasons. One is because of Cirque du Soleil, and one is because there was no ceiling. There was no no one said to me, we can't do anything. No one, and that was like, wow, really? And it was like, Gilles Saint-Clair is very good. It's like, we can have, remember him saying to the Beatles, we can have breakdancers on stilts wearing roller skates or whatever. It was like something crazy. Like that was his, and you just go, okay, I can do anything. And it's funny, my father, who I needed for the process because he was like my safety net. He was more scared than I was, because I thought I'd just get fired. I honestly thought at some point, the idea of Cirque du Soleil and the Beatles doing a show in Vegas and having George Martin's son do the music is such a bad idea that it's never going to happen. So I might as well just jump out of a plane here and hopefully I don't crash. That was the answer. And Cirque enabled me to do that. It was such a revelation to be able to have that. And I think in the early days of Cirque with Gilles and Guy and the whole team, the brilliance they had is they didn't have they didn't think there was a ceiling. It was just crazy. It's like everything was like gambling. Everything was like, let's see what happens here.
Yeah, but I think also it's because it's out of passion. It doesn't have to make. We don't act based on fear, because if you deal with people who walk on wires at 40 feet in the air,
Yeah.
you learn that. There's a generosity that goes when we do a show. It's not about not making mistakes. It's about doing something that we're very excited. And because the process is so long, you have to be passionate with every element that you're gonna spend your life with.
Yeah, and I think also there's a thing with the Quebecois and the Cirque du Soleil that I noticed, where's this, which I found actually I laughed at sometimes, which was the ability of the belief that you're very, very small and that people don't listen to you, so you fight. Actually, there's way more Quebecois than there are, in Ireland, the Irish, for instance. It's the same mentality. It's that artistic mentality of like, we need to be listened to here. We are humble. We need to be listened to here. And I think from my part, when I started doing the Love Show, there was that element of punk about it. There was an element of like, there was
yes.
an element of like, and I think Cirque has had that element of punk. It's like, it doesn't, we're going to do what we're going to do. And that boils to the creative side, where the best reason to make a show or make some music or doing these because you want to see it or you want to hear it. That's the best reason. It's like, why do I want to go work on a film? Because I want to go and see the film. Why do I want to go work on a show? I want to sit there and see the show. That has to be your drive. There's a very good story about George Harrison, who is the lead guitarist in the Beatles, and he was good friends with Monty Python. You know Monty Python?
Yes.
Yeah. So Monty Python had the script of their film Life of Brian, and they had an EMI were funding Life of Brian, and they were out. They started filming, and they're out. And the chairman of EMI had never read the script, and he suddenly read the script and thought, "Oh my God, this is about Jesus, and this is a parody of. We're not doing this." And they pulled the film. They pulled all the funding from the film.
Really?
And Eric Idle phoned up George Harrison and told him. George Harrison said, "Well, I'll pay for it." And he mortgaged his house because it was a lot of money. He mortgaged his house to pay for the film.
Wow.
And the Monty Python said to George Harrison, "Why have you done this?" And he said, "Because I want to go and see it." and they say it's still the most money that anyone's paid for a cinema ticket. And that's the creative urge. Yeah. So that is the creative urge. It's like, why are you doing this? Because I want to see the show, and that always has to be the reason. And anyone who works with Cirque du Soleil, that should be their reason why they're working on it. And there's a very interesting thing in art right now, which relates to this, and it relates in music and in film, funny enough. Where people have playlists, and there's artificial intelligence that recommends you music that you like, and it recommends you films that you like, and film companies make films they think you'll like, and it goes on. You don't want strawberry jam on toast every morning for breakfast,
exactly,
and this is and so what happens is all of the sea changes, the big changes that's happened in culture have come from people being exposed to things they don't necessarily think they like, but they realize they do. It's happened with the Beatles because there were no guitar bands for the Beatles, and then suddenly there were the Beatles.
Yep.
Elvis was this white guy singing black music.
Yep.
Rap and hip hop are a really good example of underground becoming overground. And there's a whole, and in film, for instance, Star Wars is the best example, where there was no sci-fi films. And Star Wars was basically a Western film, a Western that's been applied into space, if you like.
Yep.
Suddenly it becomes this cultural shift. Imagine a world without Star Wars. But that was a complete outlier. And people think, well, this is just normal. But no, when it came out, it was the first film of its kind. And if we only do in art, if we do in art only what we think the audience wants to hear or wants to watch, we'll never progress. And we'll never challenge, and then we'll never entertain. And we do what we do because we want to entertain people. That's the key thing.
Absolutely. The Love Show features reimagined versions of classic Beatles songs. How did you balance staying true to the original recordings while also bringing a fresh perspective to the music?
It was very interesting. It's a good question because it's also balancing again, go back to the audience of making sure the audience get their fill, if you like. And I started working on the Beatles Love Show before I'd met anyone from Cirque du Soleil.
Really?
So
Okay.
so I the legacy of that was that I spoke to Neil Aspel and I said to him, I think I can create a soundtrack for the show without using any like DJs. I think I could just use it by using what the Beatles have on tape. And he said to me, "You've got 3 months, and I'm not going to pay you." That was the deal.
Are you joking?
It's a standard contract. And so I went to Abbey Road. My father was ill at the time. He had to go into hospital for an operation. And I went and I played around. I did Here Comes the Sun with some Indian tabla instruments. So I thought that was George Harrison. I used tablas from Within You, Without You. I then took Within You, Without You because I used that and combined that with Tomorrow Never Knows. And then I had an idea how into the beginning of the show, and I had the idea for the drum solo from it's in the end Golden Slumbers, and putting that with Get Back, and then using the crescendo strings from A Day in the Life, and then I thought,
so
how do
beautiful.
I begin this? And I began it with the best ending the Beatles has is the piano on A Day in the Life, the big piano chord. Boom.
Yes.
So if I turn that backwards, maybe it'll be a good beginning. So it just gets louder and louder. And then goes in the guitar chord, A Hard Day's Night. So I built this thing. And my father came out of hospital, and he heard the Get Back. He liked that. He heard Here Comes the Sun. He heard I did a thing with Iron the Wars. He hated Within You, Without You, Tomorrow. He didn't like Within You, Without You, Tomorrow Never Knows. I thought it was I pushed it too far.
Okay.
So then Paul McCartney came in to the studios, and he heard, and he goes, "Yeah, I think you could put." My father would not let me play Within You, Without You, and Tomorrow Never Knows. And so Paul McCartney goes, "I think you can push this further. This is fine. It's clever, but I think you can push it further." I went, "Oh, well, how about this?" And I played him the 2 songs together. He went, "This is what we should be doing. This is what I want to hear."
Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream. It is not dying. It is not dying. We were talking about the space between us all and the people who hide themselves behind a wall of illusion, never glimpse the truth when it's far too late, when they pass away. We were talking about the love we all could share when we find it, to try our best to hold it there with our love, we could save the world if they only knew. Try to realize it's all within yourself. No one else can make you change. And to see you're really only very small, and life goes on within you and without you.
And so, to answer the question, I had my father and the Beatles as the guides, if you like, going, well. And then my father, to his credit, and he was a great man, sort of went, you know what? I now love this. I now love now I understand that you have this open. I now love the idea that you're doing this and you're changing stuff. And so it's a question of taste. And I found it quite strange because I did most of the creation of the thing, but then my father I'd play it to my father and I'd watch his face. It's that collaboration thing, and we trust
Yes.
each other. And there was a time when I was in Vegas doing the show, and I changed the beginning of Here Comes the Sun. And I put some more vocals on it. I had some bass, I think, from I Want You, She's So Heavy, another Beatles song. And I realized that my father wasn't there. And I felt like I was having an affair. The fact that I wasn't playing it to him first, because I'd always play stuff to him first. Even though I was playing it to Dominic first, I wasn't playing it to my father. And I found, so yeah, it was a question of balance and the great thing was both Cirque and my father and the Beatles gave me this freedom. They gave me a freedom they wanted me to push things. That was the interesting thing. I remember, like, all of them, like Ringo and Paul would go, no, you should push, what have you, I remember I played Help to Paul. Help in the show is basically just help. It's not, it's the song. And Paul goes, it's like, what are we paying you for? That was this is just help. What are you doing here?
Wow. But that's very Cirque du Soleil, and I realize it's very Beatles.
Yeah.
The mindset, like the openness to say, no, let's play with it, let's try, we'll see, and something imprévisible will happen, a surprise will come out.
And with the Beatles, there's no other band in history that have embraced so many different cultures.
Yeah,
and it's very hard to do as a band, because we all have our own DNA and we can't get away from it. But they just seem to, there's a quote by Douglas Adams, the writer, which is the key to flying is to throw yourself at the ground and miss. And the key to sometimes creating great art is to impersonate someone and not get it right. And that's what the Beatles would do all of the time. They would try and create. They would try and do a Beach Boys song, and Back in the USSR is a Beach Boys song, but it's a Beatles song. There's lots of songs like this, like Helter Skelter, and how do we like Sun King from Abbey Road is Albatross by Fleetwood Mac, but it isn't. If you listen to those two songs, and it's just like, I like the sound of this, let's do this. And that's the key, and that open-mindedness of like pushing boundaries, even though you have a culture from South Africa dance to a Beatles song, it's a perfect mix, because it shows how it's just based on music and love and passion, and not on bigotry and not on not on opinions that you already had.
Mm-hmm. It's human expression in its pure form. I know there's a lot of technical innovations used in the production of the music of love. Can you tell us about some of them? There's a unique sound system that's used in the theater, but in the process, I think you had some special software or technology. I heard about that at one point.
No, no, the hardest thing. It's interesting, isn't it? It's a really good question based around the creation of love, because we have to wind back the clock. Us being around for a long time. The creation of love was 20 years ago, and the technology was fairly we'd switched to using computers, not tape machines, so that was easier. I didn't have to wheel huge tape machine tapes around to Vegas, which I made a bit of trouble with the Beatles if I set up all of their tapes. But it was limited. But we worked with Jonathan Deans, who's an amazing sound designer who you've worked with, I think.
Yes.
And we talked about how we were going to do things. My biggest concern, winding back, was this is the first time that Cirque, or most people, had done a show of this scale which had no live musicians. There's no live musicians. It was a big issue for Cirque at the time. And we were like, no, we can't have live musicians because it's the Beatles and they're not live anymore. And my biggest concern was, like, are people going to go there turning up? To the day we opened, actually, the day we opened, I was thinking, are people going to just think they're listening to a CD or a track and this is boring? That was my concern. So I was trying to push and push in a very certain way. I became Quebecois. I was trying to push and push and make it more interesting. And then we thought, okay, we have to build a sound system which is immersive. And this is before we now live in a world of immersive audio, which is it's now happening with Dolby Atmos, etc. Essentially, what we did in that show there was Dolby Atmos before Dolby Atmos existed. We created seat speakers and ceiling speakers and speakers in the rear. And then we sat and we mixed the music, so it was completely custom to that environment. And we did have to invent new software in order to make that work and to make it play back correctly, and then create a show that could could be like my father always said, it's like scales of an armadillo's back, where it interlocks and you can move it to a certain degree, but it's still a playback system.
Wow.
And it was a fascinating. It was like playing God in a way, because I would sit in this theater, which I did when we did the refresh 7 years ago. You know, you sit in this chair and decide how the show should sound and mix the show in the room, and it stays the same every night. And it was. But I remember, here's a story. I remember with Yesterday, which is obviously a very important Beatles song, knowing that I couldn't do any crazy like mash up or sounds flying around with Yesterday. It's Yesterday. And I thought, what is a soft song like Yesterday going to be like in a theater? And I was in Montreal, and there was a big top show happening, a creation of a big top show. I can't remember which show it was. And I said, can I go down to the big top show and play Yesterday in the PA? I want to know what it feels like. And, you know, because this music had never been heard played loud, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I went down to this big top.
It was Cortio.
It was Cortio. And I went down and said, listen, and I sat in they were doing the rigging and stuff, and I sat, and they played Yesterday, just on a CD in the thing. And the thing was, everyone stopped doing what they were doing, and they listened to the song.
Wow.
Because it was loud. It's like, who listens to Yesterday by the Beatles through a big PA system in a big room?
You're right.
No one. And I thought this is interesting. There's something about music as a communal thing, where when you're a number of people and you listen to it together, there is a bond that happens with that experience. And we all listen to it on headphones now. It's a different thing.
Could you share one of your favorite memories from your experience working with the Beatles catalog for the Love Show?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many memories. There's so many memories.
So that's a tough question. The first one that comes to your mind.
The first one that comes to my mind is when Paul McCartney came to check on the show, and I sat with him, my father, and Dominic, and we listened to the opening of the show, and the idea we would present the show to him, and the show broke. Like, you know, we got to the beginning of Get Back, and the bungees came down, and they just stayed there, and Paul's just staring at everyone just hanging there. And we're thinking, we didn't even get through the opening of the show, you know, because, you know, it's like in creation, the show, it was like, and we started playing some of the music to him. And he turned to me and he said, you know, I just want to thank you for what you've done, because you have to understand that you write a song on a paper bag in the back of a van. You write the words of a song, and then it becomes this, looking around the room. And he goes, you never think it's going to become this, and it just always surprises me. And to have him and have my father, and then at the opening of that opening night, where it's on the film where me and my father walking arm in arm on stage, and we'd spent 3 years together, 2 years together, like a father and son, with me trying to impress him, with me trying to prove to him that I was good enough. And the bond that gave the two of us, you know, he died 6 years ago. We'll always thank Cirque for.
Wow.
We will always, thank the great processor, because we wouldn't have spent that time together and spend that time talking about lots of things in life as well as music. And that's probably the biggest thing I'll take. And with the Beatles themselves, it was really the first time there was a new art created for the Beatles. That was the difference. No one had ever touched the Beatles tapes before. No one had ever done what I'd done. It was like at Abbey Road at the time when I was making the show. That I was hated at Abbey Road. You know, I'm now part of Abbey Road. I'm, now, but as in those days, it was like,
really,
how dare you do this to the Beatles music?
Wow.
That was the, and so it was an interesting time, and it was the first time, the Beatles had opened themselves, and then had to collaborate and had to be forced to make decisions as the four and the two wives, or Ringo and Paul and the two wives, and it was, for me, I'd never worked with the Beatles before, so I didn't know what the dynamic was. So I was, in some ways, it was easier for me than it was with my father, because I had no history. But yeah, it was a really no one ever talked about money. No one ever talked about success being money. Success was making people happy in an audience, and making people love Cirque and love the Beatles. That was all it was.
Absolutely. In a minute, I'm going to continue this conversation with Giles Martin, the award-winning music producer, songwriter, composer, and multi-instrumentalist known for his work with the Beatles, Elton John, and the Rolling Stones, among many more. Fans go first. Whether it's early access to seasonal deals or pre-sales, pick your tickets before everybody else. Sign up for Club Cirque today, and you'll be the first to hear about access to special events, pre-sales, and discounts. Take a look behind the curtain and enjoy up-to-date news on all things Cirque du Soleil, including shows, artists, and latest innovations. Visit cirquedusoleil.com to subscribe. Before we dive into some more questions about your creative process, can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with your father, if you're comfortable, to your father, Sir George Martin, the renowned Beatles producer?
Yeah, my father and I were very close. In fact, when he was very ill, he said, I think we're telepathic. He said to me, I think you understand my thoughts. And in fact, it was a bit like Benjamin Button. You know, he wasn't around a lot when I was a kid, but he started losing his hearing, and that's what made me get into doing what I do, because he'd have to take me to studios, and I'd have to be his ears.
Wow.
So I would help him hear. And from then I learned what I was doing. I mean, he was pretty hard on me. I mean, I remember I was quite good at music when I was a kid, and he said to me, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to do music, Dad." And he goes, "I don't think you can." I said, "Why not?" And he goes, "I just don't think you're good enough." And I was like,
Wow.
But I have a slight, you're either a punk or a hippie, and I think I'm a punk, whereby, I was just like, my attitude was like, "F you, I'm gonna go and do it anyway." But
Maybe that was his plan, to provoke you.
Maybe it was the plan. Yeah, I don't know. It was hard at the time, but I think the interesting with the Love Project was as I mentioned was important for us in lots of ways, because I never had any plans on working on any Beatles material. That was never
Really?
a plan.
Wow.
No, I never thought I'd do any. He had no plans on working any Beatles material. He hadn't really worked on anything. Don't forget, when they did Free as a Bird, they used Jeff Lynne to do that. I didn't use my father. And I suppose at that time, for my career, I was thinking, oh, what am I going to do? I have a brilliant manager and friend called Adam Sharp, who I started doing classical records, and I wasn't really enjoying it. I'd just done a big classical record, which actually became the fastest selling classical record in the UK.
No way.
And I was like, what am I doing? Why am I? I'm doing music I don't necessarily, I'm not really that interested in doing. And then the possibility of the show came up, and I remember I was heavily influenced. I wasn't heavily influenced, but at that stage, at that period of time, lots of people were doing these mashups. I remember Kid Rock did a mashup of Sweet Home Alabama. Do you remember that? He did Sweet Home Alabama. I was thinking, well, that's kind of interesting. And I thought to myself, this is what the conversation with Neil Aspinall. I thought to myself, what would it be like if a band did a mashup with themselves, opposed to with two bands together? And I said to my father didn't really understand what I was saying. He didn't like that, and it was what would happen is I would sit in the studios and I would try and come up with, and Dominic and I'd have thoughts about the show, like the opening of the show. I think I did before I met Dominic. He would say what songs he wanted. I remember a good example of that was being of the benefit of Mr. Kite. Mm-hmm. He wanted to symbolize that being the media circus around the Beatles and the circuit and being quite dark. My issue with that was the song itself is not dark at all. It's quite a happy, it's very kind of like, and I remember I had a dog, and I walk around the park with my dog thinking about how I could make this song into dark, and then there was this song called Blue Jay Way, which is an obscure song that I put on. And with my father, it changed from him being suspicious of me and what I was doing to thinking, oh, this is interesting. What's he going to do next? And he would come into the studios. He would drive. He lived in the countryside, and I lived in London. I'd be at Abbey Road Studios, and he would come like 1 or 2 days a week, and I'd play him what I've been doing. And they go, "That's interesting. We should try this, or do this, or this. This is." And we go for lunch in the same restaurant every day, and we'd sit and have a really nice meal, and we'd talk about things. And most kids, what was I, 30 years old then? Most 30-year-olds don't spend that much time with their parents.
No, you're right.
And so we did. We were forced into this relationship, and it was born out of love, and it was born out of understanding music. And also, what I did, here's the thing, is because I thought that I'd probably get fired, because I thought that the whole thing would not happen. I realized that none of the Beatles tapes, the original Beatles tapes, had been backed up properly. So the first thing I did is I went through and got the tapes, and we put them onto a computer system, because they hadn't been, these are the original tapes. And so we backed them up. And so I listened to everything, and I made notes and everything. And it was like I went through I was going through my father's closet. I was going through his clothes he wore and all of that. And I was listening to, and then I would go through and I would ask him why he did this. And for him, he hadn't listened to it in 40 years or whatever. And so we were talking about stuff he'd done. It was just a bond. And so it was really, it was a time that, it was creatively, it was probably one of the most progressive times of my life. I learned so much from my father. I learned so much from Dominic, and I at the same time I think I did good work.
Giles, can you please share with us some of the most magical or like creative moments that you've experienced when working as a producer or engineer with artists other than the Beatles, or on your own as a composer? Because I'm sure you have a lot of stories to share with, like, if you choose a few ones.
I think creativity is a lot like it's a lot like surfing, and you dream of catching the wave, and you dream of having that feeling of euphoria where you are just standing above the ocean and you're riding a wave. But most of the time I spend is treading water or being pushed back by waves or trying to swim out to catch a wave. And you work with people who spend a lot of time surfing. And the Beatles, I think when my father were the Beatles, they spent a lot of their time, just catching waves. Me personally, I've had times in my life where I know that I've done good work, and I know that it's been almost overwhelming. You think, oh, wait a second, did that? And it's a bit like, again, using an analogy, it's a bit like throwing a stick in a river. It goes, it flows away, and you think, can I ever do that again? But I remember one instance in my life where I was in Japan. I was actually with my father. We were doing a concert for UNICEF, and there was a bunch of different artists. Bob Dylan was there, and Bon Jovi were there, In Excess were there, Ry Cooder was there, but Joni Mitchell was also there, and she came to the rehearsal room in Japan, and she said to me, "I'm not quite sure what I'm going to play," and I wasn't like, I knew of Joni Mitchell, I knew, obviously respected, but didn't have any idea of the impact that she would have on me. And she sat on a chair about 8 feet away, reasonably close, and played Hejira on the guitar. And it was quite extraordinary. It was like the music came from everywhere. It wasn't like a singer and a guitarist. And it was overwhelming in a way, because we spend so much of our time thinking we can learn everything, thinking that if only I'd spent more time playing the piano, I'd be a great piano player. If any of my kids would pick up a paintbrush, they'd be great artists. I'm afraid to say that just simply isn't true. Mm-hmm. Some people have genuinely God-given spiritual talents. And that moment was sitting with Joni Mitchell in a room where she sang me a song, was one of those moments you realize that no matter if you took anyone and trained them and said, you could be this, but they would never be her. And I think that's the key element. And the key element for people like me is then to try and capture that as much as you can, and capture that purity of brilliance, really, that happens.
When you create something new, what does that moment look or feels like for you? Can you talk about your process?
The creativity is writing the music, is writing the string lines the orchestra are playing. Mm-hmm. it's just instinctive. It's just, I know what things sound right. But there's a bigger question here. It's like, how do you come up with the ideas in the first place? And for me, it's quite often in the bath, or like when I'm going to sleep, or waking up, and then you write things down, you remember them, and you don't know when it's gonna. And that's for a lot of people. That's what happens. Is that you have a tape recorder. Luckily, we now have phones, and so on the Amy Winehouse movie, I'm writing the score. I've got to work out what the feel of the music should be. I want it to be her memories, if you like. And so I go to a piano and I just start playing things and I'll record it. And most of the time it may be, crap. But hopefully sometimes it's good. And that's what it is. I think you've got to be scared of looking at a blank page, but you've got to want to fill it. You can't just write, some people do, but I find that I've got to fear the blank wall. At the same time, I want to live in a colored room. And so that's the creative process. That's the thing where you think, okay, life is boring. Life can be really boring and mundane.
I agree with you.
Life is, and so how do you mix it up a little bit? How do you become, I'm still the irritating child that I always was, and how do I throw the piece of paper in the bin and miss, and then realize maybe it's something, there's something good written on it. How do you push yourself, and how do you change things? How do you disrupt your own thought and not do the same thing every day? And it's that's part of the creative process. Or you just have to do it. That's the thing. That's what anyone says, and I'm the person guilty of it. I'm the person that would rather watch daytime TV than write something. I will do anything but the thing I'm meant to be doing. And then if I do it, sometimes it works out really, really well. And I feel like, as I say, I didn't do it. It's like it's gone. It's like, it's like this thing you had in your hand, and it's like an ice cream. You can really enjoy it, but it's going to melt, or you eat it, and it's gone. It's like, my God, where's that idea? It's now on the page, but you don't go back and listen to it or watch it. You go, well, that was no longer me. That was me then. And there's a really nice, with art and creation, there's an immediacy that we have to appreciate, that living in the now thing, where you go, otherwise you become arrogant, and if you don't start afresh each time, that's what I do. It's like, I know I've done some things. I know I've done some things that are good, but I don't feel like I have. I don't feel like I have. I feel like I don't know anything all the time.
The next thing is the good one.
Yeah, because it's just like, that was me doing it then, and now I'm here now, empty again. I totally
agree.
Yeah.
It's funny because also like that, like at Cirque, the process is long, like 2 years, sometimes longer if you have construction, and you have to refresh all the time. As the creative guide, I attended a run through last week, and it's so interesting because some things, when you go, at Cirque we're very well prepared. We do storyboards, and it's very precise in each tableau what we want to say, what we mean, stuff like that. But when you go from paper to live, it's tremendous. You've experienced that with love.
Yeah.
You have to be ready to change everything. But you didn't waste your time. But paper is paper. Human
exactly
bodies
right.
are human bodies, and and we did major changes within a week, and it's fun because the team understands and master their show, and it's a living being, and then they can just, as a team, move so fast, so well. But
that's
if you
what
try to
there's
do the
something
show
that,
of last month, it's last month. It's dead. It's last month.
But that's the thing that people understand in the creative space, and I believe this actually go back to the Beatles and the studios. Abbey Road Studio 2 is actually a fairly boring room. It's where Sgt. Pepper's and Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd was made, but it's a box. And I think that as an analogy to that, as a creator, and it's the same within Cirque du Soleil, you need to have a completely open mind and no ceiling to what you do. But when you make a project, you need to put it in a box. And you need to flood that box with light and sound and colors and everything else. But you always have limitations. And those limitations can make you create amazing things. It's like that thing about, sometimes, You know, if a ball is bouncing around a big room, it'll bounce faster as the room gets smaller.
Oh,
And sometimes sometimes that limitation creates energy. It creates that energy. And I think that's always quite a good thing to understand and to sympathize. So if you're absolutely right when creating a show, if you're creating a show, you have all these things written down on paper, and you have these beautiful boards nowadays. We can sell most things to most people with YouTubes and beautiful boards. And then you're faced with the reality of having human beings. Oh my God, what are human beings doing? And acrobats and people who have injuries and apparatus and music and sound and lights. And then suddenly you go, oh my God, we've got to make this happen, but we now have these constraints. But that can make you create even better work.
If there's one last seed of inspiration or food for thought about the creative process that you would like to share with us, I'm giving you the microphone.
Yeah, okay. I would say to anyone that was trying to, and I'm humbled to give anyone advice, but my dad said to me, you should never accept second best. You should never, don't compromise your vision and your thought. At the same time, have compassion for other people and always be kind. But the key thing is, criticize yourself without closing any doors to your creativity. So listen to what you're doing and judge it, but at the same time, be your greatest advocate at times as well and fight your corner. And I think that's key. I think that you have to understand that you're not always going to surf the wave, and that you're going to be swimming through the sea and maybe sometimes feel like you're drowning. But if you try for long enough, you're going to have a great ride, and that's what people should remember.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend.
Join us for each episode as we delve into the themes and ideas that underpin Cirque du Soleil's shows. Learn more about the roots of creativity and how to keep your eyes, mind, and heart open to the new sources of creative inspiration. And remember, the creative spark dances inside all of us. Thank you so much for listening to Cirque du Sound. I am Michel Laprise. À la prochaine.
Cirque du Sound is produced by Cirque du Soleil with technical and story production by Jar Audio.
If you like what you heard today on Cirque du Sound, please subscribe, comment, and leave a review.
No one you can save that can't be saved. Nothing you can do, but you can learn how to be you in time.